Forgot how much this takes out of your voice. Hello beautiful people, my name is Zendi and welcome back to my channel. Well, I'm really excited to get into my 2024 reading year and discover as many wonderful books as I possibly can throughout the next couple of months. Given my long absence from BookTube, I felt it would be remiss to not let you guys know what I had been reading. So I'm gonna go ahead and pretend that this video is in service of that and that I am a good and diligent booktuber who catalogs her reading over time, and you and I can know the actual secret, which is that I'm using this video as an excuse to finally get to gush about the books that I enjoyed reading over this past year with people who will actually listen. Seriously, my comeback to BookTube was inevitable because at this point I was trying to talk to books that I enjoyed with everyone, from like the drive-through person at Wendy's to the folks at TSA. So in service of not being put on a no-fly list or being banned from the restaurants that I enjoy frequenting, and also not driving my in-real-life friends absolutely up the wall, I think it's best if I just get started and let you guys know the sort of things that I enjoyed reading in 2023. Most of the books that I have on this list are in some sort of cluster. Like, I think I enjoyed both or all three of the books in each particular cluster for similar sorts of reasons, so that's how I'm going to present them. I'll have my Storygraph account linked in the description box below, where you can see reviews for all the books that I read in 2023 and the ratings I associated with them. But for the books that I'll be mentioning here, you can rest assured that they're like 4 stars and above. So I'm going to be starting off with romance because I've been reading just an absolute plethora of that lately. It has quickly become my second most read genre, though usually the romances I read tend to be sort of genre blends where it's like sci-fi romance or fantasy romance. The ones that sort of wowed me most in 2023 were 2 contemporary romances, and heterosexual ones at that. Who am I? And the books that I'm talking about specifically for this category are Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert and Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. If you've been on BookTube for any period of time, you know about these 2 romance authors. They've taken the world by absolute storm, and with good reason. Dani Brown is the second of Talia Hibbert's Brown sisters trilogy of romances, following each of the eponymous Brown sisters as they fall in love. Of the 3 Brown sisters, I think Dani is my favorite. She is a bisexual witch working in academia and is a PhD student at that, and that speaks to me on a deeply personal level. And when a fire drill goes awry at her workplace and she is seen literally being carried out by her romantic interest here, Zafir, the 2 begin to kind of go viral, which works great for Zafir because he's trying to raise money for a rugby charity that he's doing in his spare time. So the 2 begin fake dating and feelings ensue from there. On the other hand, we have Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. This is one of her STEMinist novels where women in STEM fall in love with just the largest, most brooding men. Mwah. Love it. That's all I needed to be told in order to be sold on the series. But this particular novel follows Elsie Hanaway, who is a physicist struggling to make ends meet because academic jobs do not pay a whole heck of a lot. So she moonlights as a fake girlfriend. Basically, men can hire her to take her to events because they, for whatever reason, cannot tell their families and etc. that they do not actually have a romantic partner. Because of this, Elsie has sort of become a chameleon, so she can put on whatever persona that she wants, and it served her pretty well until she's up for a promotion for basically the physics job of her dream that would allow her to stop this secondary career. Pits her against a rival physicist, Jack, who's her rival not only because his branch of physics is sort of butting heads with her branch of physics and the academic rivalry just sort of spawns there, but he's also the brother of Elsie's most recent fake dating client, and so he kind of knows a big old secret about her. Dani sort of sits in the truth of who she is very, very comfortably, whereas Elsie is a little bit more, I will put on whatever face I need to in order to achieve the goal that I need to in this moment. But underneath, I think that they both have a lot of very similar qualities that attract me toward them as leading ladies. They're both incredibly driven in their specific field of interest. They are both in academia, and given that I've been working on my thesis for what feels like a million years so far, I think that's part of why I clung so hard to these women who are obviously fictional, but they succeeded. I want to succeed in my very niche field as well. So there's a little bit of like same brain going on there. And underneath it all, Elsie has very specific wants and desires as well. So I think she's actually more similar to Dani than she would perhaps be given credit for on a surface look. And while the tropes are pretty different between these 2 books, I think what matters most in terms of the relationship dynamics is that the romantic interests are absolutely obsessed with these 2 women. Zafir and Jack are absolutely head over heels in love with the women that they are in love with. They would do basically anything for them, but also they don't like overly coddle them, in my opinion. I feel like they let them be headstrong and make their own mistakes, and also let them like live in their own successes and not like define themselves by their relationships, if that makes sense. Part of what attracts these men to these women is the women's competence and ability to do the things that they do and do them very well. And that really appeals to me. I think people in relationships should like each other. That's my hot take. And these books have people in relationships who like each other, like a whole heck of a lot. And it's not always easy to get there, and it's not always easy to express those feelings, but they manage to do it for one another. And that's a sort of relationship dynamic that I'm really interested in reading about. The following two books that sort of stuck out to me and wowed me in a tremendous way are two contemporary novels, I know, Who Am I?, about young Black women just trying to live their lives, and for a million and one reasons not being able to do so in a entirely productive and happy and conflict-free way. And these two books are Luster by Raven Leilani and Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. Luster follows Edie, a young woman sort of stuck in a rut in her underpaying admin job in her too expensive city, as she begins an affair with an older man named Eric. Eric and his wife are an affluent white couple who have adopted a young Black child, and when Edie finds herself unemployed, she's invited to live in Eric's home and essentially nanny this young Black girl, Akila. And in being invited into this house where she is sort of groomed and having an affair and is sort of like the only Black person that this adopted child has ever met in her life, pretty much. The most striking relationship that I found in Luster for me was between Edie and the wife. The dynamic between those women was absolutely fascinating. The difference between Black and white, older and younger, established in her career and relatively affluent, and sort of adrift and not really knowing where she fits in, but having this hunger and this anger because of it, was fascinating to read about. And I was cheering for Edie the entire time as she made her way through this increasingly complicated tangle of interpersonal relationships in order to find out who she was and sort of believe in her ability to create and be an artist, which is ultimately what she wants to do. On the other hand, we have Such a Fun Age, which follows Amira, another young Black woman trying to figure out what she's doing in this world while all of her friends are getting like grown-up jobs, and she is still nannying for a very wealthy white woman named Alex, who is sort of one of those like girl boss entrepreneur ladies online. One night when there's some drama in the Chamberlain household, Amira takes out the young toddler and ends up being confronted by a security guard at a grocery store. And a young man ends up taking a video of the interaction and absolutely humiliating Amira, and she just wants it all to go away, but it turns into a much larger tangle and scandal of things than she could have expected. Similarly to Edie in Luster, Amira in Such a Fun Age is taking care of the child of a white couple who doesn't really know how to like interact with her in any sort of like normal person way. But where I think Amira ends up luckier than Edie is that she has more of a support system. She has friends who love her and like get where she is and where she's coming from. My reviews on both of these books go into depth more on why each one was so impactful to me to read at that time. I'll have them linked in the description box below. I am around the same age as both Amira and Edie, in my like mid-ish 20s, and expected to have things all figured out, but then not having anything figured out and experiencing a tremendous amount of like both imposter syndrome, like, oh, am I even meant to be where I am right now? But also just like not knowing what moving forward even looks like or what it would mean for me specifically. And just seeing that mental state compounded with additional complications was just fascinating to read about. And also getting to compare and contrast these two novels and seeing how much of a difference having a support system in one made for the protagonist versus the other who didn't really have that sort of support system was a really, really interesting dichotomy in retrospect. And I enjoyed both these books individually, but also as a pair to like be looked at together. Moving along to books that I think speak to me because of their very tense atmosphere. Again, no sci-fi or fantasy. Who am I? How are these the books that I've chosen as some of my favorites for the past year? I don't know, but the ones I'm going to be talking about are The Stepford Wives by Ira Levin and Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. The Stepford Wives is basically a classic. I feel like you know about the concept of The Stepford Wives, even if you haven't read the book. Basically, the long and short of it is a family moves into a neighborhood where gender roles are like really, really strictly enforced. Now, the wife of this family is pretty confused by this at first, and she's not thrilled about it. And she and her husband sort of seem to be in accord about how kind of fucked up this sort of dynamic is. And he's like, well, I'm going to join the men's club and see if I can enact any sort of change from the inside. And she's like, cool, I'm going to go talk to these women and see if any of them are like also secretly frustrated, and we can like garner support from there. But all of the women that she meets seem to be like absolutely beautiful, not a curl out of place in their hair, not a like string out of place in their clothes, content to tend to their gardens, tend to their homes, tend to their children, and tend to their husbands. And everyone is just like almost a little too like 1950s picture perfect Stepford Wivesy. She meets a couple of like-minded women and they get together and form their own sort of club to sort of figure out what's going on. But after some time, even her friends begin to exhibit more and more of the traits that the Stepford wives have exhibited. And this poor woman feels like she's going crazier and crazier until she just needs to get out. And I'm not going to spoil the ending for you, though I'm sure you can guess kind of how it goes. And on a wildly different tangent, but also like similar in my heart of hearts, and I'll explain why later, we have Grown by Tiffany Jackson. Grown follows a young high school aged singer named Enchanted who gets her kind of big break after auditioning for a singing reality show where she becomes attached to a music producer slash singer slash famous music industry guy. This man, Corey, treats Enchanted as though she's grown, as though she has like agency, and slowly begins a insidious kind of grooming process to disentangle her from her family and make her entirely reliant on him, and gets increasingly predatory. Huge trigger warnings for this book for grooming, sexual assault, drugging, basically anything you can think of. If you think this might be triggering for you, definitely check out that list before picking it up. I know it was hard for me to read at times, but also I could not look away because the opening chapter, we find out that Corey is dead and Enchanted doesn't remember what happened. And half of the story is sort of figuring out how Enchanted got into this horrible mess, and the other half is figuring out, well, what happened to Corey and how. Tiffany D. Jackson does a great job of playing with time and timelines in all of her books. And in Grown, given the like tremendous amount of danger that Enchanted is in the entire time and the lack of support around her that is empowered to help her in any way, just makes the tension ramp up even more intensely. Due to a variety of factors, she can't really get out of this horrible, horrible situation. Much like the protagonist of the Stepford Wives can't seem to extricate herself from the town of Stepford, because at that point, she's invested a lot of money into the house, her children are in these schools, her husband is in this job, and it's increasingly hard for her to disentangle her life from this place that she perceives to be an active danger to herself. But both of these women, or as I should say for Enchanted's case, girl, don't really see the danger that they're in until it's way too late. They're very frog in boiling water, where it becomes increasingly evident to them that they're in danger, but us as readers get to look at them and immediately we know, get out, you have to get out of here to save yourself. Both Grown and the Stepford Wives are basically masterclasses in how to write tension throughout a novel, based on what the authors reveal or withhold, not only from the protagonist, but from the reader as well. The degree of tension shifts throughout the book, but there's a slow and steady incline the whole time. And once you get to the end, it's truly just like you're flipping pages as fast as you can just to figure out what happens next. How does it conclude? There's so much like tension that you have to reach that release. I can't recommend them enough. And finally, we're doing something more of a pivot back to like what I consider classic Vendy on BookTube days, or at least adjacent to that. We have Why You Should Read Children's Books Even Though You Are So Old and Wise by Catherine Rundell. This tiny little thing is pretty much an essay on basically what the title says. This was gifted to me by my friend Kara from the channel Wild Book Garden, who I'll have linked in the description box below. And if you've watched any of her videos, then she's explained it so much better than I ever could, why it's so valuable and important to read stories that are marketed for children, and why those books are not lesser and are in fact often greater than books written for exclusively adult audiences, despite people regularly belittling the quality of children's lit. I have always been a truther for the quality of children's literature. Not all of it, duh, but neither are all adult books very good. So this essay didn't really do much in terms of convincing me of anything. What it did do was sort of remind me that I wasn't the only one who feels this way, which was a very valuable reminder to be given. I will say though, I did sort of fall prey to the trap for a little while there, that I thought that as I grew older, I would be interested in more and more adult books. And that has proven to be true. I am more interested in books that reflect the concerns and realities of my current existence, as evidenced by the romance books and by the coming of age but doing it badly books that I spoke about earlier in this video. That said, my thesis, the thing that I'm working on to get my master's in creative writing and literature is a sci-fi written for middle grade audiences. And for a little while there, I was getting really discouraged because a lot of my peers were writing adult books. And in workshops throughout my master's program, prior to me turning this particular novel into my thesis, I'd gotten some not really nice comments, not in terms of the quality of my writing or the imaginativeness of the world, but in terms of like kid lit in general being juvenile and my talents basically being wasted on that. Which, as you can imagine, when you've poured as much effort as it takes to complete a master's program into something, that's a really disheartening thing to hear. And especially because I feel and have long felt that kid lit, and specifically kid lit that is speculative in some way, so sci-fi and fantasy, which is the sort of thing I like to write, is valuable not only for allowing children to have access to things that might be a little harder to figure out emotionally if there wasn't this sort of like buffer of the speculative allowing them to get closer to the feeling without having to like feel it themselves. But I think it's valuable to adults as well, because inside every adult is also that child. There's also that little person who needed it explained in that way. And I think that good kid lit is actually good lit full stop, and that it's for adults as much as it is for kids. Catherine Rundle explains it better than I could. Kara, who is again linked in the description box below, also explains it far better than I ever could. But this was a very, very important thing for me to read this past year, and it's something that I will be coming back to again and again. And it's something I'm going to be thinking about every time I pick up YA or middle grade to read, just to give me a more generous lens, so that I don't get caught up in the like, oh, adult books only when you're an adult or else you're failing as a reader vibes that often permeate bookish circles. And now we have done it. We've gotten back to the bread and butter of what I consider sort of my bookish tastes. As we say in Croatian, jedna ali vrijedna, which means there might just be one, but it's worthwhile to be put on this list. The thing that I'm going to be talking about is a young adult fantasy novel called The Luminaries by Susan Dennard. I can't talk about this book in a normal way. Like, I can't have a regular feeling about this book, not just because it's by Susan Dennard, who is one of my favorite authors, but because The Luminaries started as a Twitter choose your own adventure sort of story that Susan did. It was right after, I think, 2019's BookCon, which was the first and only one that I ever went to. So I was coming down from this incredibly wonderful bookish high, and then I opened up Twitter and I saw that Susan had tweeted basically like a little poll, like, oh, here's like the premise of the story and what should the character do? And then I was like, of course I'm going to vote on this. And then basically every day for the next 6 months, me and this enormous group of people on Twitter did the choose our own adventure story to get Winnie Wednesday, who is the protagonist of both the Twitter poll and this novel, through to the end of just a really compelling story. And because of that investment in basically the entirety of this story's public-facing life, because obviously it lived in Susan Dennard's head and on her hard drive much longer than it did in its current forms out and about into the world, but for all of its public-facing life, I feel like I've been not just a consumer of the story, but sort of a participant in it. And in that way, it's sort of hard to separate those feelings from my experience of this story. The published version of The Luminaries differs pretty greatly from the Twitter Choose Your Own Adventure. It follows Winnie Wednesday, who is one of the Luminaries. They are a group of families who are clustered around these like hotspots of like magic where monsters erupt basically from the ether. And then during the days of the week, Wednesdays for Winnie's clan, for example, hunters from each of these clans, Luminaries, come out and kill these monstrous entities before they can wreak further havoc on the world. However, several years ago, Winnie's father was accused of doing sort of anti-luminary magic, being a Diana, which is sort of this rivaling faction to the Luminaries. And because of that, Winnie and her family have been exiled. And unless Winnie can compete in the Hunter trials, which are only open to people in their sort of junior year of high school-ish, she will never be allowed to become a hunter, which is the only thing she's ever wanted to be. So the Luminaries follows Winnie on her attempts to do these trials and sort of reinstate her family back into the good graces of the Luminary Society. Winnie's relationships with her old friends get complicated. Winnie's relationship with new friends become developed, and she discovers some mysteries that no one seems to be wanting to talk about or think about that only seem to occur around her in these woods. I think part of the reason the Luminaries hit me as hard as it did when I read the actual physical book of it was because of how much more complex it was than the Twitter Choose Your Own Adventure story. On the surface, this seems like a very like easy book. It's written in third person present, so it's very like in your face, things are happening kind of immediately on page. There's an immediacy to it there. And then with the Luminary clans being literally named for the days of the week that they're sort of hunting on, and it all being sort of enclosed in this sort of small town kind of scenario, which is great for establishing character relationships, but hard for making a world feel as large and expansive as, for example, Susan Dennard's Witchland series does. The setup can feel incredibly simple. So if you were expecting a Witchlands type thing from this, which I know a lot of people went into it doing, you might find yourself disappointed. But because I sort of knew what I was getting myself into from the Twitter Choose Your Own Adventure, I think I was able to like see the complexity of emotion and character relationships that Winnie was having. She's a deeply, deeply hungry protagonist. She has a tremendous desire and want for something that seems so far out of reach for her. And I love me a hungry protagonist. I love somebody who is willing to do absolutely anything and be completely ruthless in order to achieve her tasks. But she's also like a teenager. So she has all of these feelings about fitting into the society that's been rejecting her for the past couple of years. And then her feelings about, you know, being welcomed back into the society once she's started like performing the expectations that they have for their children is, but obviously she feels really complicated about that, because it's just like, I'm the same person that I was yesterday, but today you're willing to talk to me, whereas yesterday you were fully ignoring me. And while I want this, while I want to be part of this community, and I thought that that's all I wanted, I'm also really angry at you because, like, who gave you the right to see me as subhuman up until this point? I think there's a tremendous amount of complexity in the emotional landscape of this, and combined with the sort of breakneck plot that I sort of consider a staple of Susan Dennard's writing, I had tremendous amount of fun with the Luminaries, and I cannot wait for the finale of this book to come out. And last but most certainly not least, we're going back to like a bundle of books, but there's one that I want to talk about a little more intensely than the other, and that is robots / AI / constructs that give me a lot of feelings. The books that I'm going to be talking about for this are A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers and the entirety of the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. Psalm for the Wild Built follows Dex, a tea monk, and a tea monk is essentially a mobile therapist. They go from village to village serving tea to people and just sort of talking them through their various problems and ailments and concerns, and serving them cups of tea that they think will help them be more at ease or feel better about whatever is going on in their lives. Now, Dex has always wanted to travel, get out of their very small town, and they think being a tea monk will help them do this. And so they do, and they become very good at being a tea monk, but somehow they are still feeling contained and disillusioned, and they want to go out further. In the world that Dex lives on, half of the world is ceded to nature / robots who had gained sentience and separated off from humanity. And Dex, despite knowing that it's like forbidden for humans to venture out into that sort of thing, just gets a hankering to go. And they go into these wilds, and there they meet a robot. The robot is thrilled to see the human because the robots had a promise to the humans that they would just check in every once in a while and just see what the humans needed. But ultimately what it turns into is a story about these two very, very different types of creatures and very different approaches to life and figuring out how life is lived and how it ought to be lived, becoming really good friends with one another. And oh, I'm getting emotional. Dex as a protagonist is very important to me. Much like Edie from Luster, they don't really know what's up and what they're doing. They just have this hunger and they want to be more and achieve more, and they feel terrible about it because they think, well, shouldn't I be satisfied with what I have? Everyone's telling me I'm incredible at this thing, but like, I feel like I'm not complete in myself. I feel like there's a lot still for me to achieve and do and learn. And in meeting, you know, their little robot friend, the robot's like, yeah, maybe, let's figure it out. And something about that just felt really important and like a little warm hug to me. Calling it just sweet feels like sacrilegious. It's so much more than just sweet. It's important with like a capital I. I love this book, but not as much as I love the entirety of the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. I don't know how I'm going to talk about this. I feel like if you're on BookTube, you've probably either heard of or probably even more likely read at least some of the Murderbot Diaries already. They follow the Impotamus Murderbot, a security unit construct, which means they are mostly made of metal, but they have certain organic parts in them as well, who has hacked their governor module, so like the little basically chip inside of their brain that will fry their brain if they do not follow the commands given to them by the clients of the company, which is never named, that owns them. And instead of doing what all of the media says a rogue sec unit will do, which is go on a rampage and kill a bunch of people and, be a general threat to humanity and society as a whole, Murderbot just develops anxiety and wants to watch their TV shows and figure out who they are and what that means. And as it turns out, who they are is a very kind person despite it all. And what that means is some of the humans that it is with figure that out. The fact that it's a sentient human, well, specifically not human, being, and they want to do what they can to help Murderbot achieve its self-actualization and personhood. But a lot of things get in the way, mostly late-stage capitalism, but also space monsters. I'm going to link my Murderbot reviews on Storygraph down in the description box below, because if I was able to be eloquent about these books at any point in time, it was during those reviews, and even those I'm kind of afraid aren't very eloquent at all. The long and short of it is I absolutely love this story. Not just All Systems Red, but the entirety of the Murderbot Chronicles. It's a tremendously human, or I guess not human. I keep making that mistake, which is a problem. It's a tremendously person story. That doesn't make sense. I'm gonna go ahead and say it's a tremendously human story, because what we as human beings understand a human story to be is one that has a lot of heart to it. Any story about figuring out who you are and what that means within the larger context of a world and the family that you've chosen for yourself is going to hit me like an absolute sack of bricks in the chest every time. And the way that it happens for Murderbot is additionally complicated by a variety of factors. I'm an especially big fan of Murderbot's sort of anti-capitalist messaging, particularly its anti-corporate messaging. There's a sort of undertone throughout every single one of the stories, whether they are a murder mystery or whether they are I gotta save a guy from a threat. Throughout it all, there's this critique about what I'm going to call, just for the purposes of this sort of video, the commercializing of people and what it means about personhood, that we are increasingly moving toward a system where we are valuing people by their ability to provide, and people's worth is being determined by the monetary value that can be gained from them, whether through their labor or whether through their physical selves. But perhaps the most important part of it for me is the family aspect. When you don't feel human, it's really hard to feel about yourself that you are worthy of the care and consideration of others. And time again, Murderbot is proven wrong about that. And their circle of friends just grows, and their understanding of how to be a person who gets to have friends and be a person who gets to have a personhood develops over time. And watching that, reading that, and sort of experiencing that alongside them has been a balm to the soul over the past year. I don't know if I managed to express myself fully there, but the sun is going down, so this video needs to end. And also, if I talk about it anymore, I am gonna cry, and that's just not a thing that's gonna happen on camera. 2024 for me is gonna have to be the year of no recorded emotional breakdowns. I have enough of them in private that I don't need to put one on the internet for everyone to see, which means that this is it, and that concludes my best reads of 2023. And if you're interested in the rest of my 2023 reading, I've put reviews and ratings for everything I read in 2023 into Storygraph, and I'll have that linked below for your perusal if that is something you would like to see. But as far as this video, that is it from me. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, please leave me a thumbs up, and if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I post videos every Thursday, and I would love to have you join my little bookish family. Comment down below what your favorite books of 2023 were, or let me know what your feelings about any of the books that I mentioned were. I always love talking about books and engaging with you guys there, but if commenting just takes a few too many spoons for you right now, I totally get that as well. Feel free to just leave me a little, let's say, yellow heart, because so many of these books have yellow spines. And with that, that's all for me. Thank you again so much for watching my video, and I will see you with the next one very soon. Goodbye.